All right, see if I can get through this video. I tried 2 or 3 times this morning and just couldn't make it happen. So what I want to talk about, this is a Magnum block I cleaned up this morning, 318 Magnum. It's a cheap build. It's a very cheap build. I'd like to maybe make 700 horse, and then if I blow it up after that, I'm fine with it. I don't have a real purpose for it. I'm just building it to see what I can do. I still got to clean up the cylinders as far as wiping them out with some ATF, but you can see the crosshatch. So what I did this morning was I pressure washed the whole thing down. I ran the dingle balls through it. This thing is getting put back together with stock crank, stock rods, stock pistons. The Magnums have a little better piston. They're Hybrotechnics. It's really not the point of this video, but what I want to talk about is this is a Magnum block. It's a very early Magnum block. Went in 92, and the casting on the block is actually cast in 91. So if you know your years on Magnums, you'll know this is a very early block. On the Magnum heads, which is not what this is an X head I had sitting around. On the Magnum heads, you oil through your lifters and your push rod, and you oil the rocker arms that way. Unlike an LA head where you oil through the shaft on your shaft mounted rockers. Common knowledge, this is nothing new for any of you guys, I'm sure. So if you want to put a Magnum head on an LA block, which is a very good way to go, it's a very good move. All you do is you switch to AMC lifters, because Chrysler factory lifters, they won't oil through the lifter and through a hollow push rod. So you run AMC lifters that drop right in. They're the same diameter. That oils through your lifter. You run a hollow push rod, you bolt on your Magnum heads, and you're done. End of story. The harder swap is to go backwards and put LA heads on a Magnum engine. I think that's something I want to attempt on this engine. So this is the boss that you would have in an LA engine. It comes up from the cam bearing and it feeds oil up through this boss here that would be drilled out, and you can see the imprint right there of the hole on a head gasket, and on an LA that would be drilled through to the cam. You have one here on the driver's side of the engine between the first two cylinders, and then you have one here on the passenger side between the first two cylinders, between the back two cylinders. So you only have, here's an LA head, you don't have a hole here, you only have a hole here. And again, you can see the imprint from the gasket. So this head, because obviously you're going to be up front on the driver's side, and then if you take the same head and you put it on the other side, because heads interchange, that's why you've only got it in one location. That's where the oil comes from the block, and it feeds up through the head. And I don't want to beat the shit out of this thing. And right there, now where the bolt goes, but up top there is the passage, and you can see this notch here. That's where the oil feeds. It comes around the bolt, it goes into the bottom of your shaft, and then that oils your rockers on an LA head. So if you were a good and competent machinist, which most of us aren't, you could probably set up a jig and set up the block and drill this passage out between there and your cam bearing. For most of us, that's probably not going to happen. Another side note I'll tell you on there is, if you look, here's your water jackets. Here's your water jackets. And then here where your oil boss, where your oil feed would be, you notice just two small holes. And it's the same thing on the other side of the engine. 2 small holes in water jackets. And I think that the reason that they did that is because they know they're drilling this out on an LA block, and so they put a couple of small holes to not create an air pocket and to get some coolant flow through the head, but they probably cast the block a lot thicker in here so that when it got drilled out you didn't break into a water jacket. I think that's the reason you have 2 small holes and then regular full-size water jackets on the rest of the deck there. So what I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to drill into my lifter galley, and then I'm going to run a line. I'm going to drill here about 2 inches down, 1.5 inches, let's say 1.5 inches down from the deck. I'm going to drill into that, and then I'm only going to drill out about 1 inch, 1.5 inches till I hit my compression fitting. Okay, that way I'm not trying to keep a drill bit straight 6 inches down into the cam here, but I'm only have to keep a couple of inches straight there. I'm going to go to a compression fitting. I'll tie that into my lifter galley. When I do the other side, I'll also cross them together so that it equalizes the feed between the 2 lifter galleys. And then I'll drill out from here that 1.5 inches. So that's going to take oil from my lifter galley. It's going to put it into the block here, and it's going to match up with a hole that I drilled here through the factory location, and I should be able to bolt an LA style head on to the Magnum block. That's the direction I'm going with it. So I put in new cam bearings this morning. We'll talk about that real quick. Okay, so here's another part of that situation. So like on a normal Magnum cam bearing, this is what you have. Okay, so there's one oil feed hole, and that's because you don't need to oil through here. So all you need to do is come up off the mains, and then you can see this boss right here. That's going to feed off your main, and it's going to go straight up through the bottom of the cam bearing, and that's going to lube your cam. That's all you're trying to do there, is come up here and lube the cam. Now on an LA engine, on this bearing and on this bearing, you're going to have what looks like this. Now what that does is that corresponds with the correct camshaft. That's an important thing you're going to have to take note of if you're doing this. The correct camshaft, as the cam is spinning around on the correct core, it's going to feed oil from down on the mains through a hollow cam, and it's going to come out one of these 2 holes, which lines up with this boss right here, and that supplies oil. So you're not pumping oil full time here. It's as the cam spins, when it's clocked right, it feeds a little bit of oil, comes up here to the rockers, shuts it off again, feeds a little bit of oil, feeds a little bit of oil, and that's how it works. So it's not a full-time steady flow. It doesn't take a lot of oil for the rockers. You're just trying to make sure there's no metal on metal, but you're not trying to pressurize anything like you would a lifter. So this bearing would go like in this location. That would feed up from the main, and when the cam is clocked right, it would feed this boss. I'll show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about there. So this cam is a Magnum cam. Take a look at those lobes, and you'll notice you don't see anything. This cam, I know it looks funky, but it's also a small block Mopar cam. Looks weird as hell. But what you'll notice is that hole. Okay, and that's what I'm talking about. As the cam spins around and it's clocked, you get oil pressure that goes through here, through a hollow core, and out here. That lines up with those bearings. And that's how you feed your rockers on an LA head. So you need to make sure, because a lot of small block Mopar cams, even between Magnums and LAs, will interchange. You need to make sure, if you're doing this type of modification, that you don't run one of these cam cores. I'll back up. Let me correct that. If you're feeding it from the factory cam, you need to make sure you have the right cam core. If you're doing it the way I'm doing it, where you're drilling off of the lifter valley and you're coming up here, then it's not going to matter because you're not feeding from your cam. But I hope you get what I'm saying there on the difference in cam cores and the way those bearings work and the way that you feed an LA head. Aside from that, the only thing I could say is probably don't bother. And here's the thing, the Magnum heads, here's an X head, here's everybody's ooh and ah, it's a blah blah X head. Don't mean shit really, because these are great in the 80s when you couldn't do any better, but nowadays there's so much better stuff out there. And the port window is nice, but the bowl area is very small. And you're going to have a better bowl in a Magnum. You're going to have a quench pad in a Magnum. You're going to have a semi-closed chamber. A Magnum head is better all over the place than this old, 1980s folklore X heads and J heads and all the other stuff out there. I mean, I see guys take iron Magnum heads, into the 260, 280 CFM range. And I'm not saying you can't make a good head. I mean, it's a nice port. These are ones that I've opened up and done some work. I think I was going to put some 6.1 Hemi valves in them at one time. I wanted to put like an 8mm valve guide, and then I wanted to try and do a 208 Hemi valve on these. But anyhow, I'm saying that the Magnum head's a better way to go. There's a lot of cheap aluminum heads on the market that are a better way to go than messing with some of this old stuff. But where this comes about is Black Friday. I bought a couple of sets of cheap-ass Speedmasters. I haven't got my hands on them yet. I don't think very much about them. But I bought them for, I think, $800 a pair, fully assembled. So I bought a couple of pairs, and just out of curiosity, I think I'm going to try to put a set on this Magnum block and see what I can do with it. See if I can throw some eBay boost at it and make 700 horse on stock components, and then maybe I'll turn it up and blow it up just to see at what point it gives up. I don't know. Anyhow, that's where I'm at. I hope you got something from it. Sorry about the rambling. Guys, have a good night.